the whole presentation.
This meeting is being recorded.
Right, yeah. And then we'll open up for questions, both from us, of course, the audience first, and then us if needed. All right, so let me share my screen so we can start. Welcome to everyone who's joined. It's really nice to see some people who are interested in this issue of urban and peri-urban agriculture that several of us have been working on for some time now. This panel is focused on how urban and peri-urban agriculture is being seen in the global south. It draws on a project that is called UpAgri, Urban and Peri-Urban Agriculture as Green Infrastructure, and it's a large 3-year project where the logos on top give you an idea of the kinds of partners that are there. We're working in India and Tanzania. Both Professor Nitya Rao, who joins me in chairing this session, and myself are part of it. And what we want to focus on today in this session is really trying to understand who is able to grow in cities and around cities, and then who is being excluded. And then also when you think about the outcomes of urban and peri-urban agriculture, or UPA, who is being benefited and who's losing out really? What are the negative and positive benefits, especially when we think about inclusion and exclusion? Unfortunately, our third co-panelist, Sheetal Patil, hasn't joined us today. She's not too well, but she's also very much part of the thinking around this. I'm going to start with a very short, quick presentation to lay the context of this panel, and then turn to our two speakers who have some very interesting insights, empirical insights from India. So again, to start, of course, the context is, we all know that the global south is urbanizing rapidly. There's most of the urbanization that we are going to see actually in the coming decades is going to happen in Asia and Africa, more specifically. There's been a large increase in the number of mega cities and metropolitan regions in these two continents. But what we see that this urbanization is not separated from the rural. There still remain very strong links between urban and rural areas, both when you think about movement of people, but also movement of resources, as well as aspirations and livelihoods that are linked to the rural and now being seen more and more in the urban. Agriculture, of course, being one of them. Another characteristic of these growing cities is, of course, urban sprawl, fragmentation, inequality, and a lot of inequality both between cities and certain smaller towns, but also intra-urban inequalities. And as a result of this shift towards urbanization in the global south, there's been a large and growing literature around this space, which has brought forth this idea of southern urbanism, which talks about the multiple differences that we see in southern cities, things like poor environmental conditions, informality being a key one, where you see a lot of informal livelihoods, inequality and poverty, of course. But then also this idea that these cities are also spaces of innovation. They are places that provide opportunities to have climate resilient development, or at least leapfrog and avoid some of the mistakes that have been made in the global north, and that kind of urbanization. Coming more to the topic of today, which is around food systems and urban agriculture in particular. What has been seen, lots of theorists or urbanists really talk about this geographical decoupling of cities, where the sources of food and the places where food is being consumed are sort of decoupled spatially, where urban and peri-urban land use is being shifted towards more higher value uses like built up area, large industrial or even technological parks and things like that. So this squeezing out of food from peripheries also is taking place. On the other hand, of course, southern cities also see increasing climate risk, which have impacts on food systems, both in rural and urban areas, and the livelihoods that depend on agriculture. Finally, of course, there is the reality of structural development deficits, lots of issues around service provision, exclusion, of course, where at least in cities like Bangalore, where I am based, there's a lot of fragmentation in the way different sections or different income groups are inhabiting and experiencing the city. So a lot of exclusion based on underlying vulnerabilities is also being seen in these cities. To deal with some of these issues, there are a range of solutions that people have been talking about or experimenting with. Of course, if you look at the second two bullets, one is on infrastructural solutions like retrofitting infrastructure, but also socio-institutional solutions like changing people's behavior and governance systems. But what we want to focus on today is really nature-based solutions, where there are lots of conversations around growing trees, farming, food gardening in cities as a solution to some of these issues of exclusion, but also climate risk and underlying vulnerabilities. And again, when we talk about nature-based or green infrastructure solutions, there's been a rapid rise in this conversation around a sort of euphoria around nature-based solutions. But what we have been in our work cautioning against this euphoria is to say that a lot of it can be quite unequal when you look at the outcomes of who's able to access these nature-based interventions like urban parks. And this is where really we land with urban agriculture. There's been, again, a lot of conversation around urban farming as being able to provide development outcomes, help with climate change and sustainable development goals. But again, there's not a lot of robust empirical evidence to make these claims. So in this UpAgri project, what we did is try to examine what is the evidence so far saying, and we did a global systematic review of the literature to understand where is the evidence on urban and peri-urban agriculture. Those are the numbers in front of you, and we see that most of the literature has a regional bias towards northern cities. There is, of course, growing evidence in southern cities, but these tend to focus on particular kinds of issues, and I'll go into that in a bit. Another big gap, of course, is that peri-urban agriculture tends to be left out in the story when you look at the literature. So we do see lots of evidence on the positive outcomes for environmental sustainability. So, and these tend to be typically in the global north. So benefits like biodiversity, increasing in urban gardens and farms, ecosystem services benefiting, better water retention, reuse of water, those kinds of things spoken about. But in the global south, the literature, as expected, I guess, but yeah, tends to focus more on the social dimensions of sustainability, how urban agriculture helps with providing livelihoods, providing incomes, some amount of evidence on food and nutritional security as well. Again, there's a lot of, when we look at the more social sustainability and well-being outcomes, we find that there's a lot of literature from the global north around mental well-being benefits, communities coming together, but also this idea of green gentrification, where certain places within cities, certain neighborhoods tend to gentrify because of the entry of these kinds of sustainability-driven initiatives, I guess. And that tends to exclude certain communities from either particular ethnicities, particular income groups. So this idea of exclusion is there both in the global south and the north. In the global south, what we see a lot of evidence on is this idea of how land tenure and security is really not allowing people to farm. And we also see that in our evidence, and I think Maitri and Swarnika will touch upon this, how space is such a barrier to certain income groups when they try to produce food within the city. So quickly, just to end, of course, we do see from our literature review, and it's coming out soon, and hopefully some of you will find that interesting to read. There is a very large and growing literature. I won't say very large, but a definitely growing literature on urban and peri-urban agriculture and its outcomes. But a lot of that is proposed outcomes, and there's lesser empirical evidence, especially from the global south. As I mentioned, peri-urban areas and smaller towns actually find much less mention. When you see the literature, there's a focus on larger cities, and there's some usual suspects that keep being studied over and over. Even within the global south. Particular facets of well-being outcomes aren't spoken of as much, such as gender and differential vulnerability aren't really discussed as environmental sustainability is. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done there. And then finally, this idea of when you think about the outcomes of UPA, who is benefiting and who's getting excluded definitely needs more empirical attention. These issues of exclusion, what kind of food is being grown and its implications on nutritional security, the point on green gentrification that I mentioned, and then of course, insecure land tenure and how that pushes out certain people remains. So with that whirlwind introduction, I am now going to turn to speakers. It's a very interesting set of case studies that are being presented. The first is going to be presented by Swarnika Sharma and Maitri Koduganti from the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. They are presenting on the differential outcomes of urban agriculture in 2 cities in India, Pune and Bangalore. And then the second case is by Anita Pinheiro from Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi in India, where she's drawing on a case study in Kerala, where she's trying to explore how formal policy support in Kerala can incentivize inclusive urban farming. So I'll pass it on to Maitri and Swarnika first, and then Anita, and after that, of course, Nitya will chair the session. Thank you so much, and I'll stop sharing here. And just maybe also to say that after you all present, then we will be having questions from the audience as well.
Thank you, Chandni. I'll just share my screen.
Anika, you can make it a slideshow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you look at the screen now?
Not really, actually.
No.
Oh.
We can see your notes pages, and also I can see that you have 11 slides, Swarnika. So I think given the time, maybe don't go through each slide in detail. We've seen the
Sure.
video recording. So just the highlights, please.
Otherwise, if it's a problem, maybe Maitri, you can share the slides. Is that an option for you? If the slideshow thing isn't working?
Can you still see my slides? No?
No.
I don't know why it's happening. Can you share, Maitri?
Yeah, I'm just trying. For some reason, I'm not allowed to share my screen.
Oh.
I think we can take Aylin's help to make her a
Yeah.
co-host or something like that.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
In the meanwhile, I'm wondering, Anita, if you wanted to try, we could just reverse the order.
Yeah, sure. I have prepared less slides. I
Yeah,
was aiming
That's
for
great.
2 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No, that's great, Anita. Just 2 minutes would be fantastic. Because I did watch your presentation. You had a video. You had a nice video. So please do go ahead, Anita.
Yeah, I hope you can see the slides. And
Yeah. Can you go into slideshow mode?
Yes. Yes. So a warm welcome to everyone. So this presentation on towards sustainable and inclusive urban agriculture in Kerala, present policy landscape and way forward. It's based on my PhD research at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And unfortunately, my supervisor and co-presenter couldn't join us today. So basically, urban agriculture, especially urban home gardening, it's not an agenda in the government attention. So usually they focus on vegetable cultivation in large fields, but in Kerala, because of many reasons, vegetable cultivation is extending from farms to gardens, which includes urban home gardening as well. Which this is mainly because of mainly to overcome the space scarcity for commercial production and to enhance sufficient self-sufficient vegetable production in Kerala. So that the vulnerabilities associated with the present food dependency could be eliminated to an extent. So this urban home gardening is promoted in the government programs, mainly through the program called Vegetable Development Program, recently named as Vegetable Development Mission, and there is a specific component called Promotion of Urban Home Gardening. So this is the overall budget allocation over the past few years, and in this present year, actually the guidelines has not been released, and there are concerns which I would like to discuss in the discussion part. So the key features of the program is subsidized supply of ready-to-start kits. Unlike other states where similar programs, government supported programs are happening, they provide kits without soil, which is a rare resource, and everyone cannot procure that in urban areas. But here it is ready to start kits so that people can right away start their program. And the program focuses on all urban areas, not just the large cities and towns. Then there is continued technology development and support. And the program is also aimed at all income groups. There is no restrictive criteria like a minimum area requirement or the household requirement to be able to get the benefits. And the initial expenditure that a person needs to spend is less than $7 US. And over the years, the program has also become a people's movement. And in addition to the government support, people have also started, expanding these urban home gardens with their own pocket expenditure. So the key aspects are it helps to enhance the urban vegetable production, urban greening, biodiversity, and resilience, especially during the COVID lockdowns, because there was a system already in place, so that the government just need to extend extra support so that people could cultivate more vegetables to address the crisis time. So this is the total number of beneficiaries so far, but there is no database available. So this number do not necessarily indicate this many people, different people have actually got the benefit. It could be duplication as well. Same people could have got benefits over multiple years, but in last 2-3 years, the program has tried to overcome this limitation. So the way forward is, at present, the focus is only on the vegetable production, which is also placed in the context of transition to complete organic agriculture state in Kerala. But if there is any policy change in that aspect, then there will be implications on urban home gardening as well. So multifunctionality is not considered, especially in urban sustainability documents of the planning board. Urban home gardening has not been incorporated as a solution, and so it has to be incorporated as a nature-based solutions. And those who cannot be part of this benefit programs, especially those who do not have rented place or a separate household to live. So this program should also be extended to them. Then those who, and I got a comment on migrants, if they are included in this program. So far, no. But those who do not have any, separate households, they, for them, this benefits. It may not necessarily this urban home gardening, but the public space could be allocated for them so that they can come and cultivate vegetables for their own purpose. So those kinds of programs could be incorporated, but there are concerns that the 14th five-year plan, which is upcoming, do not consider organic agriculture to be a policy for Kerala. So if there are changes in that organic agriculture policy, there will be serious implications for urban home gardening. And I also wanted to mention that in the annual plan for this financial year, urban home gardening was not incorporated. So I'm awaiting more documents and more confirmation on that. But that's what I wanted to share so far. Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much, Anita. That was a very good, precise presentation. So I think that maybe we can just hold, since I think I had put a comment and you have already responded to it about migrant workers. So if anybody else has, while Swarnika or Maitreyi, you can put up your presentation. I just want to ask if anybody else in the room has any question for clarification in the meanwhile for Anita, while Maitreyi puts her presentation up. Okay, I think there's no clarificatory question. So do proceed, Swarnika and Maitreyi.
And maybe if anyone wants to even type down their questions in the comments, I guess that's fine. So.
That would be great. Yeah.
So we'll just start. We'll very briefly skim through the presentation, of course, not touch everything. So Swarnika, you can take the lead and I will follow.
Sure. Thanks, Maitreyi. Thanks, Nitya. So, hi everyone. Our presentation is on urban agriculture for all, exploring the differential outcomes of urban agriculture in Indian cities. So, this is a work we are going to present from our ongoing project on sustainable and well-being outcomes, which Chandni also spoke about. So, our field study sites in India were Bangalore and Pune. I'll just go through this slide and move on. So when we talk about urban agriculture and when we talk about the benefits from urban agriculture, both the benefits and the drivers associated with the practices of doing urban farming in cities are very different. So when we were conducting our field work, both low income and middle income settlements, we observed that there is a very clear distinction of the practices of doing urban farming and what are the benefits they are reaping out of it. So both the practices, the motivations they start doing urban gardening from and the benefits they get from were very different. So we unpacked these differences with the help of 4 types of differences, which are on practices, motivations, barriers, and outcomes. So under practices, we looked into the types and modes of farming, the use of technology, and how practitioners are involving themselves with different gardening groups. Second, we also looked at motivation. So what are the reasons that they start or continue to farm, and what are the barriers, the challenges they face during practicing urban farming, and what are the outcomes, the sustainability and well-being outcomes in terms of environment sustainability and well-being in terms of mental and physical well-being. So to start with the practices, both among middle income settlements, we observed a wide range of practices that they were doing. They were growing on terraces, they were growing on balconies, on their backyards, and using a multitude of technologies like doing hydroponics, aquaponics, and also tech-driven practices. So they were using social media and also sharing a lot of urban farming tools and practices. On the other hand, the low-income settlements, they had that constraint of growing, and then they were doing it on footpaths. So whatever space they can get on their windowsills, near their roofs, so on the parapet walls, so they were growing on very few pots, or if at all they find any empty plot, they were growing there. So from here, I'll request Maitreyi to go over the next set of slides. Thanks.
I'm just saying I'm not in the best of my form. My voice is not that great, but I'll try my level best.
So
Uh,
I
so
think you have nice pictures on your slides. So just, you can maybe say a sentence or two and just let us watch the pictures and move, Maitri. So if you can move
Certainly,
the
I think
slides
that's
to the
what we
next
want to
one.
touch on,
Yeah.
because a lot of our evidence has been very visual and very anecdotal, because that's what sort of marks the differences between both the income groups. So like the use of technology and social networks, like Swarnika already said, the middle income settlements were able to use technologies like hydroponics and aquaponics, and also the access to technology through smartphones was very evident. So they sort of use social media, not just for posting what they were doing, but also in terms of troubleshooting. Now, the low income settlements, their dependence on technology was very low, but that did not really impede them to get into different practices. So their inherent knowledge of farming has been one of their biggest assets. Now, in terms of social networks, of course, the middle income settlements were a part of large formal social networks. This can be for growing, for harvest, and also for exchange of knowledge. But in low income settlements, their association was largely informal. Like they had connections with their neighbors, and not just in the city, but also back in their own hometowns. So that was the networks that they were relying on for farming. Now, in terms of motivations, so there were clear differences in why each of the settlements were trying to grow. So we've actually used some anecdotal evidence to say that. But to really summarize, in the middle income settlements, really the need for a sustainable lifestyle and the need to be very healthy, and also certain passion for growing, was very prominent. But in low income settlements, they sort of looked at gardening as an inherent way of life. There was a lot of cultural significance for growing. So these were very distinct motivations that we observed, and that's what the pictures also show. Because this is a one nice garden in a balcony, and on the other side, the low-income settlements, you see there's a nice rangoli that's put, there are flowers that are put into it. So there's a lot of culture that goes into it, and they have a lot of religion significance out there. Now, in terms of barriers, again, we use anecdotal evidence to really explain barriers. But for the middle income settlements, lack of adequate space and time and expertise was a very important barrier for them. But in low income settlements, the lack of the very access to space, like how Swarnika said, they grew anywhere and everywhere, which was not just on footpaths, but also on the parapet walls where they put their dish TV antennas, or even somewhere they sort of bring a raised platform near their house and put pots out there. So the very lack of access to space was the biggest challenge for the low-income settlements. Another thing is also that there was a sense of precarity attached with the low-income settlements. A lot of them were either resettled, a lot of them lived on disputed lands, so they never knew when their gardens would be cleared. But for the middle income settlements, of course, there was space available either in their balconies, in their gardens, or even on empty plots behind their houses. But the kind of barrier for them is mostly in people who were living as tenants or people living in apartments and complexes. Now, a lot of people complained of smell and seepage, and so there were a lot of complaints that went. So that was a bigger barrier for the middle income settlements. And in terms of outcomes, I think we've seen.
Maitri, can you just wind up in 1 minute, please?
I guess I will.
Thank
So
you.
in terms of outcomes, I think we've seen solid waste management, food provisioning, heat mitigation. So the outcomes have been pretty much similar in both middle income and low income settlements. But in low income settlements, the well-being outcomes are more prominent than the sustainability outcomes, also because there was a sense of joy and physical health and a lot of culture that was attached. So I think as a conclusion, what we were trying to say is that, so while we were doing this, we realized that people in the low income settlements, they had very different visions of urban agriculture. And what we were trying to really emphasize on, it's very important that we acknowledge these differences, because that's exactly what shapes their practices and in turn the outcomes. And if we are to make sure that urban farming really goes into a policy, if it needs to be recognized in the policy, then the differential aspects also need to be recognized, because that's how then we will be able to really scale up the practice amidst different settlements. So I think I will stop there. And
yeah, thank you so much, Maitri and Swarnika. And sorry that you had some trouble, and also sorry to have pushed you a little bit, but I think the pre-recorded videos are there and they're really good. So I hope other people who are attending the session have also seen the full pre-recorded videos. We have about 7 minutes left for discussion. So any questions or comments? I can take from any of the participants who are attending the session. If you would like to go first, I myself have a couple of questions, but if anybody would like to make a comment or a question, especially those who are from not the panelists. Yes, Caroline, do go ahead. Do speak. Are you able to speak, Caroline? We can't hear you. Her mic seems to be on, but I can't hear her.
Oh, Mike, yeah, some problem. You can
Could you
type.
type your message, Caroline? And while you're typing, I don't know if anybody else has a question or a comment. Anita, I had one for you in terms of, you had mentioned, which I was a little bit confused, and I thought maybe you could clarify, that the 14th plan of Kerala, towards the end, you said that it doesn't consider organic agriculture. So I'm thinking that, did you mean it doesn't consider organic agriculture, or it doesn't consider sort of vegetable or urban agriculture? I just wanted to clarify, because I'm sure there is an agricultural plan as part of the 14th plan of Kerala. But could you clarify, please, what exactly?
Yes. So there is a document which is considered as a base document. A document based on the different plans, the different programs for the 14th plan will be formulated. So this was released in 2021. So in that document, it says that organic agriculture can be taken up in Kerala as a small niche intervention, but not as a policy for the whole state. If the state adopts organic agriculture as a policy, it will lead to the productivist notions that the lack of adequate food production and all. So that's what I wanted to say. It's not only about the urban home gardening, because they don't consider urban home gardening. In my opinion, they don't consider any sort of small scale production as a meaningful intervention, so that there is no mention about urban home gardening per se. And instead, they are actually talking about moving forward to nanotechnology, agri biotechnology, all sorts of the silver bullets.
Thank you. So I think this, thanks, Caroline, for your question. Caroline has typed in her question. I can read it out, probably to both. I was wondering if you had studied or come across cases of urban residents who cultivate little tracts of public land, such as along rivers in the city, or urban informal settlements, residents who work as laborers in peri-urban farms. And how does this fit into the overall policy picture? So this is about public spaces. So any of you, Swarnika, Maitri, want to go first, or Anita? And also about labor, people working as labor in peri-urban farms.
Right, we can take that question actually, because so we observed that there were very few farmers who were farming along the tracks of, along the banks of the river in Pune. But again, they were very, very small pieces of land, and though they are public land, they grow largely on disputed land. So there's no really free, open public land per se for farming, at least from what we've observed. So if it's a disputed land, then they take it, they because it's empty, then they grow food growing crops. And yeah, so the benefits are very short-lived, right? Even they do not know when the land would be taken for construction or for any other purposes, but we did observe that kind of a practice is there. Now, even in Bangalore, people do grow on empty plots, not exactly on the banks of the river, but again, on empty plots, wherever there are, because we saw this in informal settlements in Bangalore. So there were 4 buildings, there's an empty land in between, and there's a huge community garden out there. So they didn't want to leave the space empty, so they were growing. So we did observe these practices. Now, in terms of urban informal settlements who work as laborers in peri-urban farms, I think the urban informal settlements, we did not really find laborers who worked in peri-urban farms, but they were largely laborers who worked in the city itself as domestic help, as construction laborers, or as really small petty work within the city. And these people have they do garden at large stretches. I think whatever is available, they grow even more than what we observed in middle income settlements. So they do there, but again, they don't really have the scope to work in peri-urban farms. There's also a certain distance that's associated for them to go and come back. I hope
you.
that questions, yeah.
Anita, is there anything you wanted to add to this?
The point is that actually I haven't come across such practices, because it's mainly private practices that we have seen there, and that's why even there is no community engagements, community gardening or anything of that sort there. And even I'm not sure about the laborers, peri-urban or urban, and there is no peri-urban thing in Kerala.
So in fact, this is interesting, and I don't know if Chandni wanted to add, but Caroline, our project, we also looked in Tanzania, we were studying, and actually there it's very interesting exactly what you are saying, that a lot of the urban residents are actually growing what they call as open spaces, which is just public land, which is lying vacant. And I think this has been the big struggle there, that they're not always recognized by the municipality or the municipal corporations, so it's very insecure. They can't really put investments into that land, and so on. And I think they're now trying to get greater recognition, similar to the point Anita was making, that get in policy a greater recognition for urban farming as a legitimate activity, whereby, like in the West, where municipal lands are allocated, I think this we didn't find actually in these areas. I don't know if Chandni, if you wanted to say anything.
I think just to add exactly, I agree. And just to add to what Maitri was saying, in Bangalore, at least there's informal gardening and farming that's happening along lakes of Bangalore, where people are foraging, they grow something, and not only actually farming, but also livestock rearing. There's a whole informal economy around that, around Bangalore's lakes. But what is happening now, of course, with urbanization, all of that is being crowded out, and that land is then taken, and these activities are rendered sort of, informal or illegal in some ways. Delhi also, some cases we've heard of the Yamuna banks, and how people have been actually farming there for generations, but now on the pretext of river restoration and all of that, these people are being crowded out. And then when this larger story of how does it fit into urban policy, I think this is really where people who are working on this topic need to think about, where do these people go? I don't think there's recognition in urban, like if you look at India's master plans, city master plans, there's really no recognition of this kind of land use. And most of it, at least in peri-urban areas around Indian cities, it's just becoming so built up that people who were traditionally farmers are also selling away their land. So there's a real shift from agriculture to built up area.
Thanks so much, Chandni. And I don't know, Caroline, if you had a follow-up or whether you're happy with that. I know your mic isn't working. I don't know if Swarnika, if you just wanted to have a last word. I think we're 2 minutes over time. So I guess, Aileen, we need to be closing soon, or?
Exactly, and there will be a closing plenary. So
okay.
If you also would like to join that, it will be nice if you like close it soon.
Okay. So maybe I just give Swarnika a minute in case she wanted to respond to any of this. Otherwise.
So yeah, thanks, Caroline, for your question. I just wanted to add one thing to what Maitri and Chandni spoke. So regarding the second part of your question about the laborers working in the peri-urban farms, we haven't seen much of the in-city laborers going to the peri-urban farms and working there. But we have seen a lot of business enterprises coming up related to gardening and maintenance services, where they hire these laborers, where they hire a lot of migrant workers in the city where they work as laborers. So just wanted to add that.
That's a very interesting point. I think the commercialization of urban gardening is something we haven't spoken about today, but I think that's a really interesting point, that so far we've spoken about private houses in both the case examples. But clearly with this commercialization, there is also labor relations that are coming into the picture. Okay, so thanks everybody very much. This has been a short session. I think the time has passed by sooner than we had anticipated, but it's been really great. Thank you all, and thank you for the questions as well.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Nitya. Thanks, Shalini.
Yeah.
Bye.
Right.